This is exciting. I want to show you something. Here is a calendar. It is not AD. It is not BC. It is not the Jewish biblical calendar. This is a calendar based on the creation of the world. When it says 1 a.m. rather than BC or AD, AM is Latin for Anno Mundi, which means the year of the world since creation. What I am going to do, I am going to show you, not based on any calendar that is used, exactly, biblically, how many years it was from the creation of Adam to the destruction of the temple on the 9th of Av, 587 BC. The Bible tells us exactly how many years it was. Are you ready? Now, here we go. We find when we read in Genesis that Adam was 130 when he fathered Seth. So that's 1:30 a.m. All right? That's not in the morning. That is 1:30 Anno Mundi. The Bible tells us Adam was 130 when he begat Seth. This is a fact. Now, what do we find? In Genesis 5:6, we see that Seth was 105 when he begat Enosh. Well, if you take 130 and you add 105, you know Enosh was born in the year 235 from Adam. Is everyone following me? Okay. Well, then he fathers Canaan, and he is born in the year 325 from Adam. And then he fathers Mahalalel, and if you follow Genesis with this, you're going to see he was born in the year 395. Okay. Then he fathered Yared. Yared was born in the year 460 a.m. Everyone following me? Okay. Now, I'm not going to make him big anymore because I have several more to go through. Okay. So then he begat Enoch in the year 622, who begat Methuselah in the year 687. Okay, and so you can go through and you can follow every one. There's Lamech in the year 874. Now this is after creation. Okay, and then you'll see he fathers Noah. There's Noah right there, born in the year 1056 after the creation of Adam. Okay, but now look, wow. The next one doesn't come for a long time, and that is Shem, who was born in the year 1558. And then what happens? Now comes the flood. Here at this point comes Noah's flood, and we see that Arphaxad was born in the year 1658, 2 years after the flood. And so we know the flood occurred in the year 1656. Well, guess what? After this point, they start having kids a lot quicker. And so we see there was Selah and Eber and Peleg and Ru and Serug and Nahor. And then comes Terah. And guess who comes next? Abram. And we know just as the nation of Israel was born in 1948, isn't it amazing how Abram was born in the year 1948 from creation? Interesting parallel. Well, then we know in the year 2023, the promised land belonged to Abraham. Isn't it fascinating that Abraham was born in 1948, Israel becomes a nation in 1948, and now the promised land belongs to Abraham in 2023, and we're about to approach 2023? Is there a parallel? Okay, so here we go. Now, what I want to do to help you understand, I'm going to put this on a little timeline. Oh, and I have all these charts on a table over here. I have several charts. If you didn't get the charts, they're on the back of your notes is one chart. And then on the table are a bunch of other charts. I'm going to try to go slow. I'm going to try. Okay, now, I'm telling you right now, this is going to be so overwhelming that you'll be sucking air, okay, by the time I'm done. But just try to follow. So now I'm doing this arrow timeline. here's creation. And as we just saw, Abraham was born, and we get this from Genesis 5 and 11, in 1948, right? And we know he was 75 years old in Genesis 12 when he received the promise. Well, that would be 1948, and 75 is 2023 AM, which is from the promise. We're just going one direction. Then we read in Exodus 12:41, from the very day of the promise, it was 430 years until Moses took him out. And so we see in the year 2453 from Adam is when Moses took him out of the wilderness. Is everyone with me so far? Then we also read in 1 Kings 6:1, from the day Moses left, it was 480 years until Solomon lays the foundation of the temple. You notice I have verses for every one of these dates. This is solid fact. Forget our calendars, AD, BC, and forget the biblical calendar as far as the Jewish calendar. We're just looking right now from Adam until the foundation of the temple was laid. Okay, so that means it was 2933 AM when the foundation of the temple was laid. That's 1 Kings 6:1. And then we read in 1 Kings 6:38, Solomon was 7 years in building the temple. That puts it in the year 2940. Okay, well, guess what? It so happens 2940 is divisible by 7, so it was a Shmita year. And then he took a year to dedicate the temple. Okay, so what is that telling us? The fire fell in that year, which was a year of jubilee. Because in 1 Kings 6:38, it says it was finished in the month of Heshvan. Well, guess what? It wasn't dedicated till Tishri, which is a year later. And so we see 2940s divided by 49. So not only is it a Shemitah year, it's the year before the Jubilee. And we see the temple actually was dedicated in the year 2941, which is a Jubilee year. Okay, has everyone followed the math? You can use your phone and take pictures, or I may have the charts, but I want you to know all we're using is the Bible, and we're just going from Adam into the dedication of the temple so far. All right? Okay. What's amazing, in the Jubilee year, it was dedicated, when you read the scriptures, it was on the Feast of Tabernacles. And so they were commanded in the Torah, as I've mentioned before, that at the end of every 7th year, everyone has to come, men, women, kids, stranger, to hear the king read the commandments of God, certain sections that have to be read. And it's the first year of a Shemitah cycle, obviously, because the 50th year was just the first year of the next 49 years. So isn't it amazing? This coming fall is also the first year of a Shmita cycle. This fall begins a year of Jubilee. All right? And the Hakel is going to be read in heaven, just as it is on earth. Okay? Now we're going to add some more dates. So here we go. Again, this is what we already have. What I'm showing you up here right now, we know the promise was given in 2023. We know it was a Shemitah year. We know it was 430 years later is when Moses leads them out. We know it was 480 years later, the foundation of the temple was laid. 7 years later, it was finished. And then in the 8th year, which was the 11th year of Solomon, we see that it was the year of Jubilee. Now I'm going to fill in some mathematical blanks to help you fill some things in. We know 1 Kings 6:1 says it was the 4th year of Solomon. Do you know what that means? That means 4 years earlier, he became king. Not rocket science. And he became king when David dies. So therefore, we know in the year 2929 is the very year David died and Solomon became king. That's why it's the 4th year that he lays the foundation of the temple. Is everyone following my math? Okay, then what do we find? When you know David ruled for 40 years, not only did he die in 2929, he became king in 2889 then. You following me? So now we know exactly what year from creation David became king. Well, guess what else we know? Okay, it was 436 years since the Exodus. Now, here we go. We know King Solomon was 40 years and he dies. So in 2969, Rehoboam became king. And then King Rehoboam dies in 2986. Well, we know how old he dies. So that tells us he was born in 2928, a year before King David died. So David got to know his grandson for a year, and Solomon hadn't been king yet. But now we can also, when you work back both directions, things come together. Okay, 374 more years go by, and then we come to the year 3360, which we know is a Shmita year by reading Jeremiah 34. If you read Jeremiah 34, they decided to declare liberty. And then when Nebuchadnezzar left, they put everyone back in bondage. And in Jeremiah 34, God says, you did right in declaring liberty, but now you took everybody back. Therefore, you're going to be destroyed. And the very next year, the temple was destroyed in the year 3361 from Adam. Okay, has everyone got that? Now, by doing the calculations, we see the temple stood for 420 years, which is exactly what Jewish history says. Okay, we also know the kings of Judah reigned 472 years. We know that. Okay, and do you see I put a yellow circle around 3361? I put the circle around 3361 because the year 3361 AM is our constant. We know from the Bible that no matter what, it was 3,361 years from Adam to the destruction of the temple. The problem is, where do you put Adam? Is everyone following me? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? This is a rock solid constant. Now, where do we put it on our calendar? See, that's what I haven't done. So let's take a look at this chart. Let me see, where do I want to go into this? Okay, let's go, not yet, here we go. Okay, now, I am keeping this on the AM. I'm not using A, D, B, C. We know that King David became, because I said 374 years, I just threw that out there. You need to check my math. So I'm giving you all the reign of the kings. On this one chart, you have all the reign of the kings. David became king in 2889. Okay, then we see Solomon became king in 2929. 4 years later, he starts the foundation in 2933. In 2941, it's dedicated. And then look, you have Rehoboam in 2969. And this is based on how long every king reigned, which it gives you in your Bible. You can go all the way down to Zedekiah in 3350, and he reigned 11 years, which takes you to our constant again. 3361 is when the temple was destroyed. Okay, so you can check it. This is math, this is Bible, and if anybody thinks I'm wrong, show me the verse. But I'm telling you, this is the exact math of how long it was from Adam all the way to the destruction of the temple, and I just gave you the reign of the king, so now that also adds up to 3361. Okay, so what's the number we want to remember? That is our constant. But as I said, here is our problem. Let's say there's King Poobla Moobla, and he reigned 200 years. The problem is we don't know where to put the 200 years. Well, the same thing. We know from creation to the destruction was 3,361 years, but now we got to figure out where we place it in the calendar that we use. Does everyone understand the problem? Okay, now let me ask you this. In what century is the year 335? The first century, second century? Fourth century. That's what you have to remember. Everyone gets confused. They see the 3 and think it's the 3rd century. No, you're not 1 year old until you've completed 1 year. All right? So The year 335 is the 4th century because the 1st century is 0 to 1. When you see the year 135, that's the 2nd century because you got to count 0. Does everyone follow me now? Okay. So, but what's interesting is actually the constant is the 3361, and it's our calendar that is floating all over the place. God is constant. Okay, so here we go. Now I'm going to introduce the calendar that we're using now. The problem that we have, can you believe it? I have 6,000 years on this one page. All 6,000 years, okay, from 4,000 BC clear to 2100 AD. These are just using every 50 years. That just shows you how short 6,000 years is. Okay, the Gregorian calendar, the modern belief is creation was like 4004 BC. I think everyone knows that pretty much, that's what they believe. Well, the Jews say it was 3761 BC. So there's an argument of where you start everything. What we do know is 3361 we know is good. Is everyone following me? Now, the question I have is, when was the temple destroyed? The first temple, not the second one in 70 AD. What year did Babylon destroy the first temple? I hear 561, 586, 587. The scholars, depending on which scholars differ, but most scholars say the temple was destroyed in 586, 587. Okay, that's what they say. And the same scholars that say 586, 587 are the same scholars that say 4004 BC. Okay? That's why, for the most part, all the Gentiles go by that calendar. Now, here's the problem. So we think, the Gentiles think 4004 BC was the first year. The Jews say it's 3361 was the first year. Oh, not 3361, 3761. All I know is the 3361 is the truth. Where you put it, let's find out. But here's the thing. Let's start with the 4004 BC. Okay, we're going to say it's 587 BC is when the temple was destroyed. But look at my chart here. If you take the 3361 that we know from creation to the destruction of the temple and you add the 587, it takes you to 3948 BC. So therefore, the scholars have to be wrong on one of those. They can't be right that it was 587 if they think it's 4004. It has to be 3948 based on the part we do know. As a matter of fact, if you work the other direction and you go 4004, if you accept their scholars there and you go forward 3361, the temple was actually destroyed in 643 BC. Is everyone following me? All right. Now, here's the thing. If you take the Jewish year of 3761 and you subtract the 3361, the temple was destroyed in 400 BC. Does everyone see how the 3361 is correct, but our calendar is not correct? That's what I'm trying to get the point. So now I'm going to show you where our calendar came from. Are you ready? Okay, let's go to Moses' tabernacle. We're going to start there with the biblical calendar. I use the term biblical calendar. And it was about, according to the Gregorian calendar, it was about 1500 BC. Here, 3,500 years ago, God gave Israel a calendar in the priesthood. They had that. Clear back then. God knew how important the calendar was. How many of you know time is important to God? Some people don't think time is that important in the Bible. If that was the case, why did he give the birth year of every single person? And how long they reigned of every single person? Why did he give the timing of the feasts, the moeds? Time is very important to God. Okay, now, we've been a nation for a couple hundred years, right? Well, guess what? From Moses' tabernacle to Solomon's temple, was about 550 years, twice as long as America's been a nation. They had this calendar for 500 years operating a calendar and a priesthood. If you look at Exodus 12, 1 and 2, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron while they're still in Egypt. And he said, this month shall be to you the beginning of months. It'll be the first month of the year to you. Right here, God is giving them a calendar, okay, and it is based on the new moon. Everyone's familiar with that, right? Now, we know 3361 is our constant. Let's remember that. Okay, now, looky here. We got a bunch of ships. Guess what? The Mediterranean Sea, this was the world. They had ships like crazy that were going all through the Mediterranean, as well as down in the Red Sea below Moses' tabernacle there. Look at this verse. This is 1 Kings 9, 26. King Solomon built a fleet of ships from at Ezion-Geber, which is near Eilat, on the shore of the Red Sea. How many of you have been to Eilat? I've been to Eilat. Okay, it's spelled a little differently in English, but I've been down there to the Red Sea, and it's right down there, and he had a fleet of ships there. Believe me, he and the other nations had ships going all over the Mediterranean Sea. And then look at this. Matter of fact, it says Hiram sent with the fleet his servants, seamen who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon, and they went to Ophir and brought from their gold, 420 talents, and they brought it to King Solomon. Okay, so I want you to understand the Mediterranean Sea was full of trade and ships, even in the time of Solomon, 1000 BC. Okay? Now look at 1 Kings 10, 24 and 25. It says, the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God put into his mind. Every one of them brought his present, articles of silver, gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, mules, and so much year by year. So this tells us that there was trading going on, and the whole earth was coming to Solomon's temple. Everybody saw that the Jews had a priesthood and had a calendar. You following me? Okay, so now look at 1 Chronicles 28, 11 through 13. We see David is the one who gave, Solomon didn't come up with the temple facts, David did. David gave Solomon, his son, the plan of the vestibule, the temple, the houses, the treasuries, the upper rooms, inner chambers, the room for the mercy seat, the plan of all that he had in mind for the courts of the house of the Lord, all the surrounding chambers, treasuries of the house of God, and the treasuries for dedicated gifts. And here we go. For the division of the priests, the Levites, and all the work of the service in the house of the Lord, for all the vessels for the service in the house of the Lord. So you've got to understand, and they'd already gone through 500 years of doing a temple and having a calendar with Moses' tabernacle. Now they have a solid, unmovable, that's not going to move around like the tabernacle. In 950 BC, roughly, they have a temple. They have a calendar. They have priests. Okay, so now what happens? Here we go. Watch my little chart here. Who's ever heard of Romulus? Romulus founded Rome. That's why it's called Rome. He founded Rome in 753 BC. I can tell you right now, if he is of high political echelon, worth some money, which is why he's in charge, he's been to Solomon's temple. Okay? He's seen Solomon's temple. Everybody wants a nice, the presidential palace, if you want to call it. Well, guess what Romulus does? He goes, we need a calendar just like the Jews have. So he comes up with a calendar, and it's going to be based on the sun. We don't want to be like them Jews. They're basing it on the moon and the sun. We're just going to pick the sun. So let me explain to you historically what happened. We see 753 BC is the main starting point for the calendar we use now. But guess what? Romulus wasn't real bright. He said there's only 10 months, not 12 months in a year. And these were the name of the months: Martius, Aprilis, Maius, Junius, Quintilis, Sextilis, September, October, November, December. Do you notice Quintilis is for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Decalogue, December, 10. So there are only 10 months in the year, and that's why December was the 10th month. Okay, so here's the thing. Aprilis, let me start with Marcius. Let me see. The first month, Marcius, he named after his own father, Mars, the god of war. His dad was called Mars because he was the god of war. So he named Marcius. Okay, Aprilis in Latin means opening. It's when like the flowers open in April. Maius was the goddess of fertility. Junius was the goddess of love and marriage. This is why most marriages take place in June today. Okay, so those first months were all after gods, basically, and then the next months were named after Latin words for the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th month. Okay, does everybody get that? I want to make sure I don't go on. All right. Well, guess who reigned Rome after Romulus? A famous name everybody heard of, I'm sure. Numa Pompilius. He started reigning in 715 BC, and he said Romulus was nuts. There's supposed to be 12 months. So it was in 17 BCE that he added 2 months. He added the January and the February, and he put them, though, at the end of the year. So now, okay, February is the last month. This is the 12th month of the year. And so the year began in March, not in January, according to him. All right, now, the thing about Numa Pompilius in 715, not only did he say he was crazy only having 10 months, here he is. He had a calendar, but he decided we need a priesthood. Solomon has a priesthood and a calendar. We need a priesthood and a calendar. So in that year, in 715, he created the temple of Vesta. And here is a picture of that temple that was in Rome in 715 BC. He wanted priests too, because the Jews had them, and the calendar, and who he have a high priest. Someone's in charge, the big boss, and I want to be the big boss. So what he does, this is where you have the Vestal virgins come from. The Flamines were high priests over 15 different cult groups. The Vestal virgins took care of the sacred flame in the temple of Vesta. Then they had the Salii. They were the dancing, jumping priests of Mars. Then you had the Thetiales, which were priests acting as envoys to avoid wars. And finally, in 715 BC, they created the Pontiff, led by Pontifex Maximus, which means the king. Responsible for the most important religious decisions. Now, guess what? Come 45 BC, we now have Pontifex Maximus Julius Caesar. And he wants to create the Julian calendar. And he moves January and February over to the beginning. So the 10th month now becomes the 12th month. And the 9th month becomes the 11th month. And so everything gets readjusted. But this is where we came up pretty much with our calendar, but what happens, he decides, let me go over here. When he creates his calendar in what we call 45 BC, how many of you know he didn't know it was 45 years before Christ? That's not the calendar he was on, okay? So in 45 BC, he adjusts the calendar, all right, and he says this year is actually the 708th AUC, which stands for Ab Urbe Condita, or the founding of Rome. So in 45 BC, you can do the math on the charts there. You will see when Rome founded to Julius Caesar was 708 years. So he begins, his first year is the 708th year from the founding of Rome. Okay? And then what does he do? He says, forget Quintilis, we're going to call this July after me, Julius Caesar. Well, then what happens? In 8 BCE comes Caesar Augustus, and he says, well, let's get rid of Sextilis, and we'll call it August. Okay, so this is how our calendar is developing if we go back to about 8 BC. Okay, right now, you're going to see the most amazing chart in all of history. I'm telling you. I am not only going to show you the 6,000 years, for the last 6,000 years. If I were to ask you, 600 BC was what year on the Jewish calendar? Well, now you know. On this one chart, I have all 6,000 years. You can look at any date in red. Red is BC, black is AD, and you will see in blue what year it was on the biblical calendar. And I can prove this mathematically as well, because if you look at the bottom, the year we're in, 5782, is 2022. So on this one chart, you can look at any year in AD or BC and know exactly, because 3761, if you look at 3761, that's when the Jews say it started. Okay, that would be one Anno Mundi for the Jew. Well, you'll see 3761 minus 11 is 3750. That's why I have the 11 there. Okay, so I have everything is matched up mathematically. No one can prove this wrong. It's all math. And so right now you have on one page, you can instantly know any year in history since Adam, what year it is on the Jewish calendar. Okay. I mean, isn't that amazing? Just one page. You got 6,000 years of history on one page. And we're giving it away for free. Okay. I should have copyrighted it. Okay, so now are you ready to have some fun? Here we go. But wait, there's more. I'm skipping some things here because I've already laid the foundation. But here we go now to the flood. Okay, do you see the flood? Okay, we know it happened in 1656. After all of these dates are in AM, okay, we see here in 1948, you'll see little baby Abraham. Okay, that would have, see, that's 1948. All right? Now, what I'm doing, though, I am starting it with the 3761, the Jewish version, rather than the Gregorian version. I'm starting there. Okay, we're coming through. We got the 1948. Then we know Abraham received the promise when he was 75 in 2023. Then we know there was the Exodus, Moses coming out in the year 2453, okay, which would be 1308 BC. Okay, then you see the foundation of the temple was laid, 2933, which was 828 BC if you're using our pagan calendar. And then here we go, there it is. It was right after he laid the foundation of the temple when Rome is founded. It's about 70 years later. Okay, Rome was founded right there. Now what happens? The temple is destroyed, and what year is it? 3361. Everyone see that? Okay, I already did the details before we got here, so you'd believe me when I'm telling you how we got here. Okay, so now what happens? We see the foundation of Rome was 753 BC. Now look, here comes Caesar Augustus, and here he says it's 708. Okay, we know it's 3,716 years from Adam if we base it on the Jewish calendar today. Okay, and so now it's the 708th year of Rome when Julius Caesar, creates the calendar. Does everyone see the math? Okay, so now what happens? Now, early in the 2nd century, a Jewish rabbi decides that the year 3761 was creation. So if you want to know when the Jewish calendar began, it actually began in about the middle of the 2nd century when a rabbi said, let's try to figure out when creation was. So that's the year he came up with it. He's the guy that decided that it was 3761. Okay, is everyone following me? Okay, now, here we go. Here's what most people don't know because they don't know history. That's the Julian calendar was being used. But a new emperor came, and his name was Diocletian. Okay, so it was the year 4044 from Adam on the Jewish calendar, but it was 284 AD on the Gregorian calendar. But what do we find? Diocletian decides, I'm going to make up my own calendar, so it's now year 1 of the year of me. And so he calls it 1 AD, but that's not Anno Domini, it is Anno Diocletian. So in the year 284 AD, no one knew it was 284 AD because we hadn't created the calendar yet as being born from Christ. That didn't exist at this time. So everyone in Rome had to change their calendar. Instead of the founding of Rome, it's now the beginning of the reign of Diocletian. Okay, so what happens? All right, comes the year 325. What do we know about the year 325 AD? Constantine. Guess what? Constantine didn't know it was 325 AD. It hadn't been created yet. As far as Constantine was concerned, if he knew about the biblical calendar, it'd be 4085. If he had stayed on the Roman calendar, it'd be 1087. But everyone in the day of Constantine knew it as the year 41 Anno Diocletian. No one in the world of the Roman world, everyone knew it as 41, the 41st year of Anno Diocletian. That's all they knew. Matter of fact, watch what happens. We jump all the way over to 4285 since creation, 532 AD, which was 1278 from the founding of Rome. We have a monk named Dionysius in 247 AD on our calendar. Okay, Diocletian is long dead. It's been several hundred years. And Dionysius says, we need to come up with a different calendar. So we're going to come up with AD. And I decide Jesus was born. And so he decided, no one knows how he came up with it, that the first year of Jesus was what we begin. And he said the first year of my calendar is 247 from Jesus' birth. So that's where in 532 AD, which would have been, well, let me rephrase that. In 532 AD, for Dionysius, it was the year 247 of Anno Diocletian. You see, I had that in red. So I misstated that earlier. So you can cut the tape later, Jill, and correct it. Okay. For Dionysius, it was the year 247 of the Diocletian calendar. Do you realize America's only been a nation for 200 and some years? As long as we've been a nation is how long they have been using the Diocletian calendar. The Gregorian calendar hadn't been invented yet. Okay, so here we have Dionysius, this Catholic monk, in 532 AD, doesn't know it's 532 AD. For him, it's 247 AD of Anno Diocletian. And then what happens? Okay, he decides that we want to create when Jesus was born, and that is when he came up with 532. Okay, so in 532 AD is when Dionysius decided it was 532. Our calendar with AD did not begin until the year 532. Okay, and Dionysius is the one who started it, but there's one problem with Dionysius. He doesn't know math. He has no 0 to 1. He begins 1 where we would begin 0. He just knew that was the first year of Jesus' birth. Now, some people today say he was born in 3 BC. Okay, so that's off. But in case you're wanting to know, Dionysius is the one in 532 AD said it is now 532 because I decided when Jesus was born. Okay, so that's where that came up with. But look what happens. Okay, Dionysius, there was no BC at this time. During Dionysius, BC's unheard of. Who cares about BC? Now, the Jews cared clear back there when creation was, but the nations could care less until Dionysius in 532 AD decided this year is 532 from Jesus' birth. And so what happens? In 731 AD, there's a man named Bede, and he decides we need to make a BC also. So we didn't have a BC until the year 731, which is now almost 4,500 years since creation. And Bede decides that it's 3952, that arrow. He says it's 3952 is when Adam and Eve were created. So then what happens? We go about 1,000 years to Pope Gregory in 1582. Okay? This is the time of Martin Luther. All this stuff going on. And so here, it's the year 5342 from creation. Pope Gregory knows it is 1582. And he goes, oh my goodness, the equinox is not matching up with our calendar. We have to do something about this, or Easter won't be celebrated when it's supposed to. So we need to correct the calendar. So he decides in 1582, Thursday, October 4th, was followed by Friday the 15th. He added 11 days to the calendar in 1582 to make the correction from the vernal equinox. But there's a problem. He's Catholic, and none of the Protestants agree with him. They think it's a Catholic plot to put the Protestants into subjection. So none of the nations that weren't Catholic followed this calendar. There was just the Catholics. They had the AD and the BC. Nobody followed it. And so, what happens? All right. What's amazing? Get a load of this. Lightfoot, I don't know how many have heard of Lightfoot, famous theologian. He had heard that Beatty said creation was 3952. Lightfoot said, no, he's wrong. It's 26 BC. So here we have Lightfoot saying that creation isn't in 3952, it's in 3929. So now creation is there. But then what happens? Then we have Usher, and he comes in and says, no, it's 4004 BC. So we got the Christians all over the map on when it started. They're all picking different dates, and maybe because he wrote a book, everyone went with Usher. So that's where the 4004 BC came from in the year 1650. But as I said, this is all a big Catholic plot. Okay, so therefore, what happens? It wasn't until 1752 that the United States and Britain accepted the Gregorian calendar. It hasn't been that long ago. But what did they have to do? They had to correct their calendar. Therefore, Wednesday of 1752 on September 2nd, it was followed by Thursday, September 14th. They added 12 days. And so this is the calendar we're using and where it came from. Okay. And you wonder why no one can know the day or the hour. So that's just a quick history of where our calendar came from. All right. What had happened was Usher decided creation was October 23rd of 4004. What's fascinating, this to me, this is fun. I just like looking at this. But you can see why the calendar issue can be confusing. Now, let's look at our verses on your notes. Sorry, I'm going over. I'm almost done, though. Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. If you remember, look what happened to Ezekiel. He had to lay on his side for a long time. It says, God says, I have had the years of their sin measured for you by a number of days. See, God's very interested in time. He says, 390 days you have to take on yourself the sin of the children of Israel. And when these days are ended, you got to turn on your right side and you're going to take on yourself the sin of the children of Judah. 40 days, a day for a year. I have had it fixed for you. This is fixed. You're going to lay on this side for this many days and this side for this many days, but one day represents a year. Does everyone see that? Matter of fact, look at Daniel 12:7. Here he has a vision, and he heard a man clothed in linen, which was on the waters of the river. And when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, he swore by him that lives forever, it shall be for a time, times and a half, when he will have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. All these things will be finished. A time, times and a half, is 3.5 years. A time is 1, times is 2.5. So we're talking 1,260 days. Is everyone following with me? Now let's look at verse 11 through 13 as the book of Daniel finishes up. It says, from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination that makes desolate is set up. There will be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But go your way to the NB. You're going to rest and stand in your lot at the end of the days, the acharon, the etz, when it's all done. Okay. So now, who's right? Is it 4,004? Is it 3,952? You know, what is it 3,761? Right now, I haven't told you which calendar I believe is true. We know our calendar's off because the temple couldn't have been destroyed in 587 BC if you go by the other calculations, right? Or it could have been destroyed in 587 BC, but the creation of Adam had to be different. Everyone following me? Everyone confused? All right, good. Well, let me show you something fascinating. I believe God can reach both groups on both calendars because he has the ability to do that. Even when we screw up and got everything wrong, he still manages to speak to us. That's what I think. How many of you ever heard of the Dome of the Rock? Talk about an abomination that's set up on the Temple Mount. That's an abomination right there. Do you know it was built in the year 688? This is Wikipedia, whatever, but basically that's when it was, ta-da, their grand opening ceremony. 688. Well, you know what's fascinating? If you take these verses, the 1260, the 1290, and the 1335, if you happen to add 688 to each one of these, you come to 1948. When you add 1260 as a day for a year, if you add that to 688, you come to the year 1948 when Israel was created. If you add the 1290 and 688, you come to 1978. Well, guess what? What do we see? 1978 was the very year of the Camp David Accords. Egypt was the first nation to sign a peace treaty with Israel, and it happened in 1978. And then if you take the 1335 and add 688, you come to this next year, 2023. It'll be fascinating to see what unfolds next year. Not only that, the Dome of the Rock was destroyed and rebuilt. And guess when it was rebuilt? In 1023, you add 1,000 years of one day, you come again to 2023. Okay, now. All right. I think everyone understands the math now. Now, the math is set. Okay. The problem is, where are we now? When did everything begin, right? So let's do. Let's say the Jews got it right at their end, going this way, and let's say we got it right at our end, going that way. And we meet at the destruction of the temple and see where that gets us. Okay, so we're going to accept the start date on the Gregorian calendar with 3761 BC. We're going to go forward and end with 3361 for the destruction of the temple, because that's our constant, okay? The Jews were the first ones to go backwards. The nice thing is they only went forward. We don't know if we're coming or going. We have BC and AD. But, so here, now what let's do, let's accept the Christian dating going backwards that we got this year correct of 2022, and we're going backward to 586, 587 BC. The problem is, no one ever figured out we're missing 2 years from 1 to 0 and 0 to -1. So to really know, we got to add the 2 years. So if you take our current year of 2022, and you take 586 going backwards, but you add the 2 years from 1 to 0 and 0 to -1, following me? You come up with 2,610 years. So here we are in 2022. If we go backward to the destruction of the temple like they believe, 587 right in there, there's 2,610 years. Now, people wonder, where is the discrepancy from the Jewish calendar and our calendar? Why the 200 some years? It's because they have a 200-year different start date. It's not that difficult. We started in 4004. They started in 3761. That's why the difference is because when it started. Okay, so anyway, when you do that, you take the 3361 from the Jewish calendar to the, or I should say the biblical calendar, starting at when the Jewish calendar say it started, and you add it to what we have now. We are literally now in the year 5971, which is a little closer to 6,000. So, the year 2022, if you use the math in the Jewish calendar going to the destruction of the temple, 3361. If you use the Gregorian calendar from today going back to the destruction of the temple, you get 2,610 years, which means this year would be the year 5971. Now, here's what's fascinating. We know we're in the Shmita year. We know this coming fall we begin a jubilee year. This is what we do know, with the year as 5782. But let's put down our 5971. And if that is true, then that also, it so happens, according to the math, is a Shmita year as well. But this fall does not begin a Jubilee year. The reason why we know is 5971 is not divisible by 49. It's simple math. So it is a Shmita year. It's just the following year isn't a Jubilee year. But look what happens. The year 2029, if you take 5971 and add 7, it now is, we're looking at the year 5978, which would be 2829, just before the 2030. Well, guess what? 5978 is divisible by 49, which means the fall of 2029-2030 will be a Jubilee year. So no matter what, the next 7 years, they have a possible Jubilee on either end. So no matter what, either this fall, according to the current calendar, definitely is a Jubilee year. But if you use the Jews and the Christian thought together, guess what? After 7 more years, it's a Jubilee year according to that. So no matter what, this coming fall definitely could be the Jubilee, but if not, the next 7 years is. So that's kind of where we're at, and just what I wanted to share with you guys. So you guys can put all this in your pipe and smoke it however you want. But I just wanted you to see why no one knows the day or the hour. But we're supposed to know the seasons, okay? And I'm telling you, like I showed you the other day, hunting season, remember? Okay, we're entering the season that we need to be looking for the Messiah. With that said, let's stand. Pick up your charts if you need them. They're on the table. Do your research. Do your own math. See what you come up with. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we just thank you so much that you love us so much. And I just pray you'd give all of us eyes to see, ears to hear, hearts to understand, that your people would be as the children of Issachar that understood the time so they knew what they ought to do. Father, we know we're entering into the season of the Messiah. We want to have our eyes and ears open. We want to get all of our building material right. We want to be building with gold, silver, precious stones, not wood and hay. So, Father, I just pray that you would speak to each one of your kids. And we're so grateful that not only do you want to bless us, you want to put your name upon us, as you told Aaron to say, Ivarekaka Adonai Ba'ishmareka, Ya'er Adonai Panavileka Vichuneka, Yisa Adonai Panavileka Viasem Laka Shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In that most wonderful name, Eyeh Asher. Yeah. Amen. See you next week.